Welcome back, 365 Sports. Scott Dochterman of The Athletic joins us now, and Scott wrote a very comprehensive article today on where the Big Ten stands as spring football has come to a close. Quarterbacks, portal, recruiting, all of that. Scott, thanks for hopping on the show. Let's start with the quarterbacks and with Ohio State. Will Howard was supposed to be kind of the running away starter while they let the young guys marinate, but that's not necessarily the case coming out of spring, is it?
Yeah, it was really interesting when you see Will Howard coming from Kansas State. You thought, okay, he's going to take over, and it means that probably two quarterbacks are going to hit the portal. Well, that never happened. That was really surprising because I think, number one, Will Howard, while being a very good player at Kansas State, had a lot of competition this spring at Ohio State. Devin Brown, who was their number two last year behind Kyle McCord, had a really good spring, and there was some anticipation that he was going to leave. He was going to leave, Ohio State and transfer, but he's right there in the thick of the competition. And then there are two of the best freshmen in the country who are kind of down the list. Julian Sayin, who transferred from Alabama after Nick Saban retired, and then Aaron Noland as well. So they've got a really heavy competition, and all of them seem to be locked in it. So I would say Will Howard is still the odds-on favorite to be the head coach, to be the quarterback. But then after that, I would probably go with Devin Brown being right there at the end.
Scott, I was just perusing through your article earlier, and I was curious just off the top of what's it like to have to regularly write Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA and take account for their position now in the Big Ten?
Well, I was just getting used to Maryland and Rutgers, and now you add these four to me. And honestly, I think the most difficult and challenging part is, especially this year, is now having to go back through those teams, what they did, what they lost, go through the portal, go through the NFL draft, see how they competed last year. I mean, I was pretty aware. I mean, they were obviously Oregon and Washington were outstanding. USC had the worst defense we've ever seen, and then UCLA has had a lot of ups and downs. But outside of that, it was still a challenge, and especially I think Washington might have been the most difficult because once Kalen DeBoer left for Alabama and Jed Fish joined the posse up in Washington, there's been so many players that have left via the portal and so many players that ended up in the NFL draft. It was really hard to try to track down some of what has been going on there in Washington.
So when it comes to the quarterbacks as well, I mean, there's a lot of coaching changes as well that you track, but Michigan State, I mean, they're turning it over, baby, and they bring in Aiden Shiles with Jonathan Smith, obviously that Oregon State connection. Just what have you made of the early days for this new era of Spartans football and, the impact that getting a guy like Shiles to at least command the offense can have, and just kind of what are you expecting right now when it comes to Sparty?
I think it might be a challenging year for Sparty to lose 48 players out of the portal, and a lot of those players have been were walk-ons, of course, and some entered the portal and left and then went back in it. But to have that much changeover year after year over year, that is going to be awfully difficult for them to put a roster together. I mean, we saw that with Colorado, that the first 3 weeks were great and the rest of the season was not. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with, possibly not to the same high-profile extreme as Colorado, but when you're bringing in that many coaches or players for a new coach like Jonathan Smith, you've got to have kind of a learning curve, and there's going to be some challenging games for them. They play Ohio State, they play Michigan, they play Iowa, they play some other really good teams. So I would expect them to struggle, but also Aiden Shiles does have a lot of talent, and if they get in a situation where they can get to a bowl game and show progress, then I think they've got an opportunity to have success, big picture. But this year, narrowly, it's probably just going to be, hey, fill out a team, compete, and hope for the best in some of the games where it might be 50-50.
Where do you think Penn State stands as we go into another year, Drew Aller at quarterback? And this is a team that's really good, unless they're playing Ohio State or Michigan or somebody of that echelon. How do they get out of the rut that they're in? Because James Franklin, for all intents and purposes, one of the best coaches in the country, but he, kind of operates and lives squarely on the second tier of coaches and programs right now.
Yeah, they're kind of stuck in a little bit of a purgatory, and now that they're freed a little bit from that, being out of the East Division where they were behind Ohio State and Michigan every year, that now they have an opportunity to kind of break out of that. They do have some big time games. I mean, they're going to play Ohio State again, but they're the only team in the new look Big Ten that doesn't have a protected rival. They like being unrivaled, and that's what they are. And but I think this year they have the team that is very much capable of running the race in the Big Ten and winning it. I mean, I think you look at of all the quarterbacks returning that, that they have, probably the best one. I mean, his 25 and 2 touchdowns, last year, Drew Aller was 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I mean, was terrific in some games, but then in the big games, he wasn't quite there. They have a couple of really good running backs. They lost their best receiver in the portal, but they still have really good defense. I think Abdul Carter is going to be tremendous off the edge, and but they have to get past some of those games. Now, I'll say this: the standard is changing for some programs, and Penn State will be one that benefits from this, because before, if you didn't get into the playoff in your team like Penn State, it was kind of a failure. But now you get into the playoff and they would have been in the playoff 5 or 6 times probably if it was a 12-team playoff. So they have that opportunity to get in. And then, then we'll kind of see where they fit in the world, whether, getting to the Final Four that way is palatable, or if it's still kind of the loser's mentality. So I think right now they're in that they should be in the top, considered one among the top 3 in the Big Ten going into this year.
Scott, what did that mean? I know that the conference stuff can get very tribalistic, especially these days because of all the realignment and everything. But what did Michigan winning a national championship and obviously the Big Ten's got all the power they need already, but what did that mean just for the conference, like in general, for it to not be Ohio State and to be Michigan for the first time in such a long time?
It's I think people are looking at it in different ways. I mean, one, every conference likes to beat their hands on their chest and say, hey, we're the best. And you've seen that from the SEC for, a couple of generations now, and they rightly so. But I think with the Big Ten and having it be in Michigan, it does show that, hey, we're not just one team that, every now and then, gets lucky, but just makes to the championship and wins it. And Michigan for the 3rd straight year, we got to the playoff and this time won it. But there is still a lot of animosity over the spying scandal, and there's not a whole lot of love for Jim Harbaugh in among the Big Ten, and so I think they were kind of like, all right, we won it, but that just, you feel wrong cheering for them, and maybe if I would say, well, maybe if it was somebody like James Franklin, they'd feel differently, but they feel the same way. So yeah. I guess, yay, Big Ten, but it had to be him. That's probably the way both teams feel.
Speaking of Michigan, though, they lost a lot to the NFL draft, Scott. A lot to graduation. Look, J.J. McCarthy was the quarterback who got them over the hump. Now they're in a quarterback battle. How much can we really expect of them in the follow-up year?
I think they're going to be very competitive. I don't know that they are good enough to be in that. They might be on the outskirts of the playoff discussion this year. I think if I was to kind of label it in tiers right now, I would say Ohio State, Oregon, and it's hard to say that anyway. Ohio State, so Oregon, weird. And Penn State would be probably my top 3, and Michigan, probably Iowa, maybe, probably the next 2, and then kind of go from there. But they have a really good defense coming back, and I'm sure they're going to be fairly selective and good picking out of the portal. So they're never going to put themselves in a position like they were under Brady Hoke and being a bad team, a bad program for a while. But I would expect, to see them probably 9-10 type of wins this year, which for a lot of teams, they would accept that. For Michigan, I think they would accept it this year, considering what they did last year. But it's still, I think they're a couple steps below. I think Ohio State is clearly the class of the conference. right now.
I know we can't ask you about every team because that would take an hour with the way these conferences are set up now at this point. But we did cover Matt Rule for several years here and kind of know how he operates and know that year one was, like let's get it all kind of reorganized and rebuilt and all of that. And now heading into year two, they got a young hotshot quarterback. Whether we see him at the start, Scott, I know is still a question mark, but it seems like they have momentum. Do you feel momentum around Nebraska football, or are they kind of just in that sort of purgatory where they've been the last, several years now at this point?
I think they've always been capable of making that step forward. They'd have everything you want as a program, and they always have, to be successful. They just haven't done it, whether it was Scott Frost, all of his issues. Then last year it was offense, which was really strange because in the years past it was defense. I do think that they're more than capable of being a competitive team in the Big Ten in year two under Matt Rule. And if Dylan Raiola can take them forward as a quarterback, then I think this team is probably going to get to a bowl game, which it hasn't since 2016. Can you imagine that, saying something like that 25 years ago with Nebraska? But that's kind of where they are. And they seem to be momentum there, but it's almost like every year they win the off season. They're the program that hey, we're back, we're going to finally be there, and then they don't. So there's a lot of skepticism, but I also think that eventually they're going to break through, and Matt Rule's probably the guy to do it.
You've covered Iowa for a very long time. What is the new look offense look like at Iowa? It's a
work in progress right now, I would say. They had some issues with injuries still because Cade McNamara, their quarterback, who came in last year, tore his ACL. He's not all the way back, and they didn't have anybody else who could really. They had a couple of guys, one transferred out who was the backup last year and didn't do so well, Deacon Hill. They had a couple of guys kind of running the offense. There were some pluses. I think the running game looked a little bit better. It was going against a really good defense. They brought back 6 guys from there were 6-year guys on the defense, so they decided not to go to the NFL and come back to Iowa, so they're going to be good there, and that's kind of hard to judge against. But there's going to be a little bit more motion. There's going to be more a better passing scheme, which I think a lot of us could do better than they did before and when it came to schematics. So I would expect Iowa to take steps forward there. The question is, can Cade McNamara and Tim Lester, the new OC, do they have enough receivers? Can all those three, if they can all work together and produce a moderate passing game with that defense, they've got an opportunity, I think, to be competitive for a playoff spot because they have. Last year, they were number 1 in the country in yards per play allowed, and they had 200 more snaps than number 2. So they do have a defense that's more than capable of dominating, and they have a running game that I think will be okay. But that passing attack, man, it was bad last year, and I don't think they'll be great this year, but I think they'll be a little bit better.
Scott, before we let you go, you're an NFL draft Nick like me. What was the biggest thing that stood out from you from this last week's draft?
Wow, I would probably say, the Bears draft had to be something that everybody was talking about. To be able to get Caleb Williams you're talking about an organization that hasn't had a Pro Bowl starter at quarterback since 1941. They've only had in the Super Bowl era, they've only had 2 Pro Bowl quarterbacks. They didn't start Pro Bowls. So to be able to get number 1 and get a quarterback like Caleb Williams, I think that is probably the most fascinating part of the NFL draft. And then to do something completely unbear-like and draft a wide receiver at number 9 with the kind of talent that Rome Odunze has, I think to me that says something about the direction of the Bears and the NFL. And the NFL is better when the Bears are good, just because they're a team, the 3rd biggest market. People get to talk about them. So that would probably stand out. But I'd say the quarterback, 23 offensive players in the first round. That's something we've never seen before. That's what's going to really determine whether or not this draft was successful and interesting, or if it just is a complete bomb, or how those quarterbacks end up doing.
Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Scott, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks so much. Have a good day.
There you go. Read that column in The Athletic if you're a Big Ten fan, but